Well, good morning, gentlemen. I'd say this is an awesome thing to be here and a part of this. My first year, I was invited at Shield Camp, and then shortly after reached out to and asked if I would be willing to teach or lead us in a segment. And I was excited for that. And then, usually when you get invited to one of these types of deals, you get to choose the lesson. I don't remember, but I'm quite sure I didn't get to choose it. He chose that I had this one, and I was grateful for it. As you can see, the title, Be Clear with Boundaries. And it's like, that's made for Tim King. Boundaries was my issue I should say it's always going to be a thing that we deal with as men of God. But man, when I'm talking about at 19 becoming a Christian, finding a way to orient my life in a completely different lane, it's just been the story of my life. And I think that there are a lot of you in this room who can relate to that. And so this subject is awesome. And I'm happy to be a part of leading your minds in it. I gave you a handout of a lot of questions that was made weeks ago before all of the lesson was put together, also with Terry presenting last night. I crossed off one of those that we're not going to cover. So that said, of the 13, there's going to be about 7 or 8 we're going to run through. And we're not going to ask and then discuss all of them. But I certainly will basically set up the question for us to think through it. You take notes. After we get through a lot of our material, hopefully there'll be some time to come back and maybe discuss some things to make note. But at the same time, if there's something that you want to say, and you feel it's a ringer, and everyone needs to hear it, raise your hand, man. Please, this is our time together. I will plan to get through all of my material and make that work, but at the same time, this is our time. So please find that to be comfortable for you. But let's talk through this. Being clear with boundaries. Setting guardrails for a godly life. And what I want to do is first start with why boundaries matter, kind of as an introduction here. Whenever you hear that word, no need to answer this, but whenever you hear the word boundary, think about what comes to mind. There's a good chance you maybe immediately thought about borders, the idea of fencing, or something along those lines. Maybe you think of rules, the idea of restrictions, right? You following? Some may think about boundaries holding us back from freedom. Something that boxes us in. But what if the opposite is true? What if boundaries are actually established to build something better? There's a story of a dad that let his young son ride his battery-powered Jeep in the backyard. And he told his son, this is for you to enjoy. Stay back here while I work inside the house. He said, you can ride anywhere in the backyard, and then a few minutes later, if you're a dad who's had one of these in your life, hearing those plastic tires on concrete is noticeable, the sound. And he heard that sound, and when he looked out the window, the boy was on the sidewalk headed toward the main road. So the dad, he didn't disconnect the battery from the Jeep and set it aside and say, son, you can't ever be in this again. He didn't set it in the garage forever, but he did something that might seem extreme to some. He built a fence. Not to take away the boy's fun, but to protect the freedom that he'd been given. And if you think about it, that's what God's commands are. Every rule, every precept, every decree, like we read about in Psalm 119, it's a picket in the fence. But to protect us is what it's for, not to punish us. Instead of seeing the fence as control, it's actually designed to help us flourish. You see that? Something there that's actually designed out of love. But here's the thing, the longer that a man lives with boundaries, the more likely he is to interpret God's word as controlling instead of loving. And I'm hoping to put the spin on that in the right way for us today. He sees the fence and assumes it's keeping him from something better when in reality, it's holding back what could destroy him. So the focus for this session is to be clear with boundaries. A call for us as men to set practical, Bible-based guardrails in our life around our conduct and habits. It's going to be for things in the home, things in the church, things in the workplace, and beyond. So hopefully you're going to be finding something very practical for you today, not just because we want to avoid sin and stay out of trouble, but because we want to walk in strength, don't we? We want to be guys who walk and also want to lead well in a world that's constantly trying to blur the lines. So let's start in Psalms. Let's go to Psalm 1. Let's read verse 1 and 2 together. And then we'll jump into this first question and think through this together. Psalm 1, verse 1 and 2. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. So the question is, why does Scripture begin with what this man doesn't do? And what's the lesson for us when it comes to the influences that we allow around us? So I want us to think through this for just a minute, because it seems that strength, the real godly strength, doesn't just show up in what you do, how you serve, things that stand out, what you do better than what you didn't do before. It seems to show up first in what you refuse. And I want us to think about that a little bit. Before this man is ever known for delighting in God's law, he's known for drawing a line around his influences. Notice that. He walks not. He stands not. He sits not. In other words, this guy, it sounds like he has some boundaries. You catching that? He's not figuring it out as he goes. It seems that he's pre-decided in his walk as to what he's going to do and where he's going to be instead of lingering. So this is where I think we need to start as men. We live in a world where influence is everywhere. And it's louder now, it seems. Maybe it's just because we're getting older, more mature, and we're thinking through how it all comes at us. But it seems to be getting faster, more accessible than ever. And if we don't decide what we won't let shape us, then the world seems as it's going to decide for us. Influence doesn't show up and it's waving flags and letting you know, hey, I'm here. It seems to be more subtle than that. And so the psalmist sort of puts it in the way of influence walks beside you, influence stands near you, it sits next to you, so be careful here. Don't do these things. And if we're not clear on what we're letting in, we'll wake up one day becoming a version of ourselves we never intended to be. And this is why we need boundaries. So let's get to question number 2 here. And let's talk about this one, actually. I want to open up for just a moment. As illustrated in just the intro that I gave with the Jeep and the dad and that fence, God gives commands not to take away our freedom, but to protect it. So why do we sometimes struggle to see boundaries, God's boundaries, as good? What do you think's the setback there? Anyone? Go ahead.
Because we sometimes want things that God doesn't want to have. So we do the inner battle. I like that thing. I see it. It's enjoyable. But I know God doesn't want me to do that. So it's frustrating.
Does everyone hear back there? Because we want things that we don't have, and there's this inner struggle with that. And I think we can all see how that comes to fruition, right? Go ahead.
Another thing I think is kind of like a teddy bear or blanket for a little child. You know, when we become Christians, we're supposed to be very, but we want to hang on to that teddy bear and blanket sometimes. It's not as comfortable, bigger, but it's something like you said, like
Yeah. And it's
I call that, like I call that teddy bear.
that's a good
I got to work on it.
it's a good sermon. The teddy bear sermon, we'll call it. God's wanting us to mature and grow up. We need to set the blankie aside. I saw another hand. Go ahead.
Well, one thing, we sometimes want to get as close to sin as we can without sinning.
Isn't that something? Sometimes we want to get as close to sin without sinning. So it's really the oldest lie in the book, literally, when we're talking about what we're putting to mind here, that God is holding out on us. Where do we see that? Genesis 3, in the garden. That's right. So the serpent doesn't say, hey, go and why don't you rebel against God? That's not what we get in that scene. He says, did God really say? And right there, he gets Eve to question the boundary. Not because the fruit looked evil, but because it looked good. Remember that? So the enemy doesn't need you to hate God. He just needs you to doubt God's intentions for your life. Like peeping through the slats of the fence, even though the fence is there and you should be enjoying all of that territory, you're trying to see what's on the other side. Or maybe trying to pull away a picket that got loose to see if there's an option here that you're not getting elsewhere. Or maybe just getting a friend to boost you as you climb up over that fence. That tends to be what we're inclined to do. So let's be real for a moment. How many of us have blown through a boundary in our lives, not because we're trying to rebel, but because we started believing that I'm missing out? Or maybe this isn't such a big deal, I can handle this. That's how it starts. Boundaries only feel unnecessary when we're not thinking long term. But the moment you understand that God's boundaries are an extension of His fatherhood, everything changes. I love the comment that someone made in Bible class, and I love it because it was my wife who actually made the comment. Oh, it's so good. Anyway, I asked the question because we were talking through prayers in the Psalms and got to Psalm 119. You know how David always says, oh, how I love your law, your commandment, it's just on and on about that. And I got the question out there, I said, how does one come to love commands? And she raised her hand and she said, because he loved the commander. Chills, man, that was so good. But she's right. That's how it all changes. You love your dad enough to listen to him and respect him. So let's talk about drawing lines before it's too late now. Some of us in this room know exactly what it's like to live without boundaries. Again, prior to 19, man, I did everything shy of getting myself in handcuffs. There was a lot of things that I did without limitations, but a lot of us have paid the price for that. And we've got stories to tell, to warn others of. We've waited until after the damage was done. And maybe this section of the study could hit a little bit harder, but knowing what it's like to draw the line a little bit too late, we can relate to that. And many of us know that you don't have to wait for the life to get to rock bottom before you realize I need to get myself above water here. The Bible doesn't tell us to manage temptation. It tells us to flee it. Instead of telling us regret the past, it tells us to guard the heart before sin ever gets a chance to get in. So let's start there. Let's get to 2 Timothy chapter 2 now. And we're going to get to question number 5 and just think through it. No, we're not going to interact with it unless there's something you'd like to share there. But 2 Timothy chapter 2. And we'll focus on a piece of this, but let's begin in verse 22, read through verse 24. We're going to focus on that first line. So flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. Have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil. So flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness. Have you ever thought, question 5, as to why Paul says flee but then also pursue. And what happens when we only do one of those? I want to walk through this with you for just a moment. Because you can't just run from something. It sounds like you also have to run to something. There's an exchange here. A man who only flees eventually gets tired and circles back. If you don't know what that's like, well, I think you know what that's like. We've all had that experience. I was going to say, ask me, but I'm tired of mentioning that. I'm not that bad of a guy. I made mistakes, but hey, we're all in this together. But there's that sense of knowing, like if we put it off, we're going to try to go back to it. For example, a man who deletes the app but never deals with the desire will end up downloading it again. Or a man who cuts off the affair but never pursues healing in his marriage will eventually look for connection somewhere else. Or a man who stops drinking but doesn't pursue accountability or purpose will eventually find another way to numb the same pain. But a man who flees and pursues, he has direction. Paul's not calling Timothy just to be moral here. He's asking him, or not asking, he's calling him to be intentional. What am I chasing? What's shaping my desires? What am I letting grow inside of me when no one's looking? Boundaries don't just keep sin out. They create space for godly character to take root. Let's move on. Hebrews 12. Let's go to that and let's read verse 1 together. Hebrews 12 in verse 1. We're going to focus on the action here. So therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, here it is. Let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run. So let's think about it. What kinds of things, this is question 7, what kinds of things in our lives weigh us down or trip us up? So this is a good moment to self-examine. Even if they're not technically sinful, what are they? Why do these need boundaries too? I think this is where it gets more personal. Because some of the heaviest burdens are not just sinful, they're also things that are just distracting. That's what it sounds like to me. They don't rarely get defined or categorized as wicked, but they're certainly weighty. And if we don't draw a line, we'll end up tired, we'll end up tangled up, and ultimately you're going to be ineffective. You're not going to have the ability to move and do the things that are obviously more intended for a man of God. Think of time wasters, the constant scrolling, the comparisons, trying to please everyone. It may not be sin, but it's not helping us run. Boundaries aren't just about stopping sin. I hope we're beginning to put that into mind here. It's not about how can I stop making these mistakes. They're about making sure that you're still in the race and having yourself move in a direction that God is calling you into, which is upward. Pressing on, as Paul says. A man with no boundaries can still be busy, but he won't be fruitful. So maybe the question isn't, is this wrong? Maybe it's, is this keeping me from leading my home well? Is this keeping me from loving people more fully? Is this keeping me from finishing the race with nothing left in the tank? Because I've stripped myself of all of this that weighs me down, and now God can lead me well. I saw a hand just a moment ago. Go ahead. Yeah, perhaps a past regret, that wants to kind of resurrect. Is that what you mean? Like something that you set aside and now it's kind of...
Not necessarily, just something that, and this would be personal for everybody, something that when you start getting into it, or if you're doing it too much, you'll find your mind going places where it shouldn't be going.
I see. That seems to be the way that it always courses, right? It leads to more of those views and perspectives that you wouldn't have had you not taken those steps in that direction in the first place. I think of just, with a lot of things in life, I think we can see that unfold. But we've got here hopefully something that's allowing us to see that it's a lot of management when it comes into what I know is going to be pulling me away and clinging to me in such a way that I can't move and I can't have myself walk, as according to what the Scriptures teach us, walk with Him. I mean, keep in step with Him, as Paul says. So there's something here. Hopefully we're starting to locate within or even identify before we got here today. Let's talk about conviction, not consequence. Let's go to the next section here, because we've all seen what happens whenever boundaries are built and then are built after the fallout. You know, maybe we've had to draw the line after trust was lost with someone, just to be able to have credentials again in that relationship, perhaps. Or after the sin already started eating at the soul, and then we realized, okay, let's not go this way again. And maybe for some of us in this room, that's where this lesson hits the hardest, because we know the cost of waiting too long. And we look back at that and wish we wouldn't have. That hindsight's 20/20 kind of thought. But what if we didn't wait for the consequences? What if we started drawing boundaries because of conviction? Let's walk through this. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy 6. Again, thinking about the idea, if I respond to conviction instead of making these mishaps and then I bring about consequential behavior or consequential changes. So 1 Timothy 6, let's begin in verse 11 and let's read. But as for you, O man of God, flee these things. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, gentleness. Fight the good fight of the faith. So let's talk about this. What does Paul mean when he calls Timothy a man of God? What do you think he's getting him to recognize maybe about himself there? Why? What do you think he means? You, O man of God. Why call him that? Go ahead.
That was the designation for the prophets of old, like Elijah and Elisha.
Okay. Okay. They want to do right. Okay.
It's an identity, right?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a different standard for us than from the people who are not. Don't feel the Lord.
Okay. All right.
Expression and conviction.
Okay. Very well.
Relationship. You're a man of God. Belong to God. You have a relationship.
All right. So I think what we're seeing here, and it kind of goes all in the same bucket, because of this identity of who you are, there's a charge you've got that's different. It's designated much differently than perhaps the one who doesn't fear God or the one who doesn't walk with God. It seems here that it's not just a compliment, it's this charge of saying, Timothy, you're not like everyone else, so don't live like everyone else. Flee these things. Be, in what we're seeing, gentle, steadfast, pursue that stuff, because that's who you are. That's not who you once were, it's who you are today. The old man is no longer, and that's who you are beginning, or today. So what we see, a man of God doesn't wait for the trouble before he gets clear. It seems he decides now. That's that conviction of who I am and what I'm going to be. He knows what's worth protecting. So he purposes in his heart what's worth walking away from. That's intentionality. What's worth chasing. And he's not doubtful whenever temptation comes. I think of Daniel, who resolved in his heart, or who had himself inclined to do those things whenever temptations would come. I think of Joseph with Potiphar's wife. I mean, the guy seemed to have already had himself set in mind as to what he wasn't going to do, even though he got harassed day after day. And so I see that designation of who I am. And notice again the verbs that we read through in that section of 1 Timothy. Flee, pursue, fight, take hold. It doesn't sound like something that a man of God does on autopilot. It doesn't just happen in automation. Because we came up out of the waters of baptism, it seems that it's intentional. It's a discipline, like we just got done thinking through a little bit. So these boundaries are how a man of God stays in the fight. Because if we're unclear on where the line is, maybe we'll end up venturing too close and stepping over it, if we're not mindful of these things. So let's look at Titus 2, verse 7 and 8. This is getting to question 11. Titus 2. This is quite the challenge here. He says, show yourself, Titus 2:7, show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works. And in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing to say about us. So question 11, what does it look like to set an example through self-control and sound speech? Anybody? What does that look like? Say again? Looks like a disciple of Christ. Unlike the world.
There's a saying in Spanish that says, don't do good things that look wrong, and don't do wrong things that look good.
Oh.
That look right.
A saying in Spanish, don't do good things that look wrong and don't do wrong things that look good. Right? Yeah.
Because sometimes you might be helping, let me help this lady in need, but the way she's dressing, and then let me give her a rice to her home.
Sure.
That might look wrong.
Oh.
So you need to stay away from the image of wrong. And maybe you can call someone else.
Yeah.
Or get her in contact with someone. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
do right things that look right. Don't do right things that look wrong, or do wrong things that look right.
It takes prudence and wisdom right there. Yeah. It takes a good sense. I saw another hand? No? Oh, good.
For me, it's living a life with purpose. Last on the mount, you said, your will, not mine. And living a life with purpose will be seen.
Be recognized. So in the other side of this, how does this call us to build boundaries around how we talk, around how we act? Any other thought to this? Go ahead.
Well, first in my mind is be quick to hear and slow to speak. Right? My dad is very measured when he hears something, and when he says something, normally he's speaking with you. Right? So you're quick to hear and analyze the situation, but don't let yourself talk quickly until you have an
That's yeah. Good.
So it suggests that awareness of how we appear to others as a call, not in the Matthew 6 sense of doing it to be seen of others, rather that's part of our mission, not just to keep ourselves pure, but to have an influence on those who are observing us and so that they can.
Yeah, so it's effective in what it's doing. So Paul tells Titus, don't just preach it, live it clearly so that no one can question it. It's kind of another way to put that. All respects, be a model of good works. So self-control is not the stuff that we do in the dark, in the quiet, when no one else is around. It becomes what appears to be public fruit. things that people can really see, take hold of, get a good taste of it. It shapes how we respond whenever we're stressed, how we speak when we're tired, how we react whenever we're misunderstood. All of these things take boundaries. All of these things take that sense of knowing people are seeing and recognizing something. Boundaries around our tone, our sarcasm. Think about that. Boundaries around our silence, our speech. How about our defensiveness? Or even our humor? Woo. Because how we talk is one of the clearest signs of who we're becoming. It's one of the signs of what we allow unchecked. It's also what we value and how much Scripture is in us. People see that, all because of what we're seeing in this text. I saw another hand. Go ahead.
What about verse 10, Titus 2? To adorn the doctrine of God our Savior. I think that's what he's getting at. That we want to adorn, we want to glorify. We are supposed to be God's children, and so we should reflect our Father.
Yeah.
That's why we need to set a good example.
Sure.
Yeah,
in this context, I always think about that song. Some people hate this song, The World's Bible. I think it's awesome. God has no hands but our hands to do His work today. He has no feet but our feet to lead men in His way. It's a great song. It always comes back to the light on the hill, can't hide it under a basket. And what we're seeing here, I mean, there's a reason that we are people who have a ministry that He's called us to carry out, as Paul talks about. We have something that people are needing to hear, and they're going to recognize it by way of what God is leading us to live like. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that our speech and our actions have to match. You have to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
Saying.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are going to see hypocrisy.
Sure. That's the fruit of the tree, right? So, let's get to this last section. We've covered a lot today, but now it comes down to this living with clarity. So question 12, let's really try to be honest with ourselves here and do some self-examination. But what's one area where we know a boundary needs to be put in place? And what would it take to finally draw that line for you? We usually already know the answer to this. It's not something that tends to be hidden so much that we can't identify it, or so complicated that we can't understand it. Maybe it's just uncomfortable. And maybe it requires honesty and the courage to pray as David prayed in Psalm 139. And this is one of my favorite prayers, or one of those that he offers up because it's so relatable. This is the end of the Psalm, verse 23. Psalm 139, verse 23. And this is, again, that honesty and courage that maybe we need to step in to our day and our season that we find ourselves in now, if we've got this as a need. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I always hear that and think through on how much of a struggle I have in identifying what David is asking for there within myself. Sometimes people may give you some flags as to what's going on, but then ultimately you may not catch it still because you're caught up in something. Maybe despair, or caught up in some type of weighty thought or sin, whatever it might be. But what you get here is something that David helps us move and navigate through much better. That one habit that you've maybe justified. That one text thread you haven't yet deleted. That one show you keep watching. That one relationship you haven't redrawn. That one pattern you keep calling not that bad. And so you see, boundaries don't work until they're clear. And they're not clear until we've drawn a line with them that we just won't cross. That's how this works. So the question is, are we finally ready to draw a line in our life that we know that we need to set? We're doing this because we care too much about what's at stake not to. Because we want to live in the light and to be men of clarity. Men who lead our homes, men who serve our churches, men who walk before our God without compromise. But then we get to this discussion here in Proverbs 22. This is now getting into question 13. This will be the last part, and I'm going to close this down and then open it up for any discussion after. We'll have a few minutes. But Proverbs 22, verse 28. It says there, do not move the ancient landmark that your fathers have set. So question 13, what does it mean to not move the ancient boundary? And how does that apply to truth, to doctrine, to our discipline today? So this proverb's not just about property lines. Certainly it does fit into that discussion. But I think it's more profound than that because it seems to be digging into truth and conviction and a lot about what we're hovering around today in our discussion. About God drawn lines. What He would deem that we need to determine as, I need to set this here. Things that we have no business shifting in life. For example, we live in a culture that celebrates line moving. Think about it. Moral lines. Gender lines, church leadership lines, holiness lines, and it just could go on. It rewards the man who adapts instead of the man who abides. Isn't that strange? That's just the way that things are around us. But the call of God has never been to update what He said. It's always been to honor it. Don't add, don't take away. That's the idea of protecting it, to live with it without an apology. Because we don't need to be the kind of men who flirt with the edge of how close can I get without crossing over. We need to be the kind of men who plant our feet and remain steadfast and firm. Because when boundaries are held, the path stays clear for God to work and for us to walk without regret. So with all of that said, here's what it comes down to. Close this up. Boundaries are not a suggestion. They're how a man walks in wisdom. Without them, we drift, and if we keep drifting long enough, we'll crash. If your lines have gotten blurry, brother, now's the time to sharpen them. If you've been unclear in your home or in your habits or in your walk, it's time to stop making excuses, O man of God. This isn't about guilt. This isn't about image. It's about protecting what's worth protecting. The enemy doesn't need full control of a man to ruin him. He just needs access. He needs a way in. That small compromise, that unchecked influence, that one area we refuse to deal with. Drawing the line is not legalism. It's leadership. It's taking hold of your life. It's how we guard our families. It's how we stay sharp. And it's how we finish the race without regret. So, gentlemen, from this point forward, let's not wait for the fallout. Draw the line now and keep it.